Sinify it. And to do that, they had to put more and more Chinese, namely the majority population Han Chinese, which they have done on a continuing basis for about 5 decades. So for 5 decades, they've essentially been giving incentives to Chinese to move in and set up shop and run businesses largely in the centers. And many Chinese have taken these incentives and gone out there, so that now the Han Chinese are actually the majority of the Uyghur territory, or Uyghur Autonomous Region, if you like. They are the majority and the Uyghurs are the minority. One of the two problems that exists here is the Chinese that have been moving in have essentially been basically peasant, poorly educated Chinese, very hard-working and intent on raising their status in life, but not very sophisticated, not very well educated, and bringing a lot of prejudice about minority peoples with darker skins, people with different religions and the like. At the same time, the Uyghurs have been moving farmers, etc., into the cities, and these two less well-educated populations are sitting there side by side, rubbing each other the wrong way. So there's a great deal of tension that's been building up for years and years and years. I've been into the area and I've seen it, and now this spark has happened over in this toy factory in the eastern part of the country and has set off these riots inside of Uyghurstan. So basically, the long and short of this is the Chinese have been trying to turn this into a part of China and basically trying to put on top of an autonomous population that's accustomed to ruling itself, a Chinese population as their controllers, if you like, as their colonial masters. That's where the core of this problem lies.
Absolutely. And let me direct this question to you, Mrs. Bremer. Regarding the Muslim minorities around other regions in China, would you, let's say, think or predict that's going to be the same situation, same problems if this conflict keep on rising?
I think that the problem in the Uyghur area, it shares a lot of characteristics with some of the other problems. Tibet was mentioned in your starting piece, but the problems in the Uyghur area are different in certain key respects. As Jerry mentioned, there has been a real effort to encourage more Chinese to move, Han Chinese, to move into the area to the point where they are significantly a majority in the urban areas, although still it's a more or less 50-50 in terms of the total extent across the entire province. But there also has been an emigration of Uyghur to the eastern coast, trying to find jobs. There is both a perception on the part of the Uyghur that they have not been able to participate as much in the economic growth of China, and therefore they have come to try to seek jobs in the eastern parts of China. But at the same time, there's a perception on the part of many of the Han Chinese that, in fact, there have been too many preferences and too many subsidies put into the direction of the Uyghurs. So one of the major sources of the conflict is these very different perceptions on the part of the different groups, with the Han Chinese feeling that there has been too much done for the minorities, but the minorities feeling that, well, they haven't really seen the benefit. They haven't seen the jobs. The jobs in their area have gone overwhelmingly to the Han Chinese, in part because of political reasons and in part because of the educational issues. So this is a very difficult problem, but the Chinese have used both carrots and sticks. And I think that the Chinese government has not, unfortunately, shown any hesitation to bring very heavy repression down on the Uyghur to try to clamp down on this problem, while at the same time promising them additional benefits and additional subsidies to try to contain the situation. But ultimately, they really do need, I think, to try to provide a greater measure of autonomy, because the description of autonomy has been there, and the letter of the law has given them some autonomy, but the real power has pretty much remained, of course, with the Han Chinese and with the central government, and that has fueled the resentment over the past couple of decades.
Well, when it comes to the Chinese government, well, it did blame the head of the International Uyghur Council, Rabi Gadir, for the whole conflict and what's
Yes.
going on. What is your opinion? Is that true? Does that statement stand on itself?
No, no, I really feel that this is part of their effort to accomplish a couple of political purposes. One is to try to say, well, this is not really a Chinese problem. This is something coming from the outside, whereas it's very clear that this is a problem that has roots going back not only before the communist government took over, but back into the beginning of the century and even back over hundreds and even thousands of years. So it's clearly not logical that somehow this is a problem that has been created by an activist in Washington or wherever. But the other aspect of this is that the Chinese have tried very hard since 9/11 to claim that this Uyghur problem is part of an international Islamic terrorist or Islamic militant problem, whereas in fact, although there are some individuals, of course, who may have been involved in international groups, really this is a local Chinese problem, and they are, I think, are simply trying to cover up the negative propaganda and the negative image problems that arise, rather than there being any significant factor coming from outside of China.
Mr. Leach, the Chinese government did announce that the whole situation in Xinjiang province is under control. And the statement itself, I mean, meanwhile, we were seeing in the media, we're seeing on all the sources that, let's say, they impose blackout on the event itself. What is your opinion on that topic?
To start with the reference to the lady Rebia Kadir, who lives here in Washington. In fact, in her role in this, she is regarded as the leader of the Uyghur movement. She's often called the mother of the Uyghurs, and she's become something of a prominent personality here in Washington. She's been interviewed on television in recent days, and she has flatly denied that she instigated this uprising, and she says while she does talk to people regularly in Xinjiang on the telephone, she's canceled against this kind of uprising, saying that it would be counterproductive, bring more troops into the area and make the repression of the Uyghurs more onerous. From having heard about her philosophy and knowing about the way she leads, my inclination is to believe that. So I believe that that is in fact the case. And once again, as Dr. Bremer has said, the Chinese are trying to basically find a scapegoat from the outside world when this is largely an internal problem, if you like. The Uyghurs are not natural activists. They're not people who have frequently taken to the streets. They're not violent people overall. This is an explosive situation which brought about by this, match on gasoline or petrol in this toy factory in the east, if you like. I think it's now simmered down, though it, of course, is going to leave a lot more troops and a lot more riot police in Xinjiang. I think one policy on the part of the Chinese is likely to be revisited. That is, this immigration from Xinjiang province into the eastern part or the industrialized part of China is not entirely voluntary. A lot of these people that go to work in the factories are basically people who are being pushed out by the Chinese officials in Xinjiang, who clearly have quotas. Beijing has told them they have to send so many people from such and such a town, such and such a village, such and such a neighborhood in the city, and send them often in groups with police over to the factories. Now they're doing this not because they're short of labor. They're actually doing this with quite a different motive. What they're trying to do is give the Uyghurs a chance to earn some real money in the factory and integrate better with China by living amongst Chinese. The only problem is the people that are being sent are very often young, very often don't want to go, and they're Muslim females who are not accustomed, and indeed by social obligation and social code not supposed to leave their families, and they're being forced into this involuntary migration in the east. And there were a lot of these involuntary migrants in the toy factory in Shuangdao.